What episode is this, by the way?
13.
Episode 13. Wonderful. All right. Good evening, guys, and welcome to episode 13 of the Racing Line podcast. Good evening, gents. How are we going?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, well,
Good,
thank
mate,
you.
good.
Guys, today we've got something a little bit different to talk about. If you've been following us on socials and you look at the profile picture and the cover photos, etc., you'll see
Shit.
what
I think my internet's shit. I'm gonna change.
we're getting you.
Rah.
We're getting you.
That's right, don't worry. It's all
We'll
good.
keep going. We'll keep going. All right. So, if you've seen our profile pic, you'll notice that we've got Formula One, IndyCar, MotoGP, and supercars, and we've spoken and had podcasts about all three of the other, but we haven't really discussed any supercars up to this point, right? And obviously, moving into 2022, the plan is to put a lot more focus into Australia's favourite racing series. But what we thought we'll do this weekend, and it's kind of good that there's no Formula One to talk about as well, is we would talk about the last few rounds of the Supercars Championship since it resumed 4 weeks ago at Eastern Creek, and then to preview the Bathurst 1000, Australia's biggest race, coming up next weekend. And then obviously there's a few questions that we'll get into as well that Harry's brought up, etc. So we're going to jump straight into it. And Joey, you're going to be essentially facilitating the conversation tonight. So where would you like to begin, mate?
Well, firstly, I'd like to begin with the fact that it's not called Eastern Creek anymore. Now it's called Sydney Motorsport Park. So let's get on the lingo as we are professional journalists.
Where were they racing? In what suburb were they racing?
At Sydney Motorsport Park. Anyway,
In Eastern Creek.
Anyway,
Semantics, boys. Semantics.
Anyway, regardless. So I think the return of the supercar season this year was much heralded, but also I think looking at the month of racing that we had there, I've had discussions with Anthony about it already, about how the whole layout of the 4 weeks, I suppose, panned out in hindsight. So we had 4 weekends back to back at Sydney Motorsport Park with not much variance in the way that the actual races panned out in terms of the lengths, but there was a bit of variance in sort of tyre strategy and stuff like that. So I think the first weekend they ran one variation of the tyre, and then
before we even go there, let's just start with let's go right back to basics.
Who impressed us?
Not even that. So that we had a number of sprint events to begin the month of racing. So there was 3 super sprint format races, and for those that might not know what that is, a super sprint is essentially a 125 kilometer race. Over the 3-week meetings, they were using different tire variants, so either the super soft, the soft, or the hard. They had in the races, they had to run 2 types of the tire, and they only had a certain amount of allocation. But I think something that we spoke about a few times over the last month, Joe, is that with the venue that they had available, they probably could have done a lot more to kind of spice up the racing week by week. I mean, Sydney Motorsport Park has 3 variations to the track as it is. And we kind of thought, when they announced the resuming of racing and that they'd be racing, 4 events at Sydney, that they might kind of try to change things up just so that each week there's a slightly different spectacle. It's not the same. There might be some layouts that suit teams better than others, because I think what we kind of got was a month of racing where the teams that are traditionally strong at Sydney Motorsport Park were strong, and the teams that are traditionally struggle a little bit more there, even though they improved over the course of the month, probably didn't get the most out of that month of racing.
What do you guys think of the track there?
I love it. I think it's I always think it's the best in terms of just the layout, the best sort of purpose track in Australia. If that's just not even me being biased, I think if you look at the layout and how fast it is, but also it just flows so naturally. I really love it. I think it's an amazing track.
I tend to agree with you there, Joe, to be honest with you. I mean, Australia has a lot of, obviously a lot of purpose-built tracks that we race at. Some of them are definitely better than others in relation to just general configuration and the kind of racing that it brings about. But I think, if we think about the history of SMP and previously Eastern Creek, it used to host, MotoGP races before they went back to Phillip Island. So it's obviously a purpose-built world-class facility. And I think that you see that in the racing and the kind of, I think that long distance race on Saturday night, the 250-kilometer race that we saw, kind of showed the best of that track, to be perfectly honest with you. When you can see the amount of tyre degradation that is generated and the kind of racing that it facilitated, it was really awesome to see. And I really enjoy that track. I just thought with the facility that they've got, with the fact that they've got the lights, but also the fact that they've got multiple variations of the track that could be run, I think that there was a little bit lacking. And also, you've got 4 events. Why not try to mix up, have one less super sprint race and have one more super night, just to try to change it up a little bit. So those are the kind of things that I was thinking about the most. But all in all, the fact that we had supercars for the last month, the fact that the championship was able to continue is probably the most important thing. And the reality is the fact that we're even talking about it now probably means that we're a little bit spoiled, because it wasn't looking too good after the lockdowns in Queensland and Victoria. So
I'd like to hear as well from you guys, just quickly, when I talk about the track. What do you guys think about the actual venue in terms of like for viewing? When we went for a walk around that whole bottom half on Saturday night, and Harry, you were there with us for quite a bit of it as well, and even the hill area, how it's a bit sort of like an amphitheater. What do you think of it in terms of viewing?
Yeah, look, I think, where you guys ended up walking to after I left probably had a bit more of a view of the rest of the track. We were kind of on turn 1 there, where it's kind of blind. You can see down the straight and it comes around to that sweeping turn 1. But I don't know, did you guys see more of the track where you ended up walking to?
It was
Like
actually a
where we
much
ended
better
up was probably the
vantage point.
best spot.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
ended up going, after you left, we went from turn 1 to the back of turn 2, and we were sitting on the hill. We watched the start of the Saturday night 250-kilometer race there.
Yep.
And then we probably sat there for about half an hour or so, and then we climbed over the hill to the back entry, and then we sat there for the rest of the race. And that was probably the best vantage point, because we got to see from turn 4, turn 5 into turn 6, and then obviously as they went through turn 7 as well. So it ended up, we ended up having a few good places to sit. But from your point of view, being the first time you'd been back there in a while, the first time you'd probably reconnected with supercars in a couple of years as well, did it kind of give you the buzz that you were expecting?
Yeah, I think I'm getting back into it for sure. I was watching a few of the highlights again this afternoon, and I love it. They get so close, they're hitting each other. It's really good wheel-to-wheel racing, and the cars just look awesome. I don't know why I stopped watching it. I used to love it back in the day with Scafie and Lounsey and all those, and I think Garth Tander was at the top of his game back in the day, and HRT was still a thing. And then I kind of stopped watching it for a long time. But I think next year definitely going to get back into it, and I think it's a good time as they're 2023. They're going into Gen 3, so it's a good time to reconnect.
What about yourself, Mick? You came a little bit later, but you invested in some merchandise, which shows your commitment to the series. How did you find that night?
Yeah, look, obviously supercars as they're known now, I haven't really been, I'm like Harry in a way, haven't really been paying attention to it, I'd say 5 years, maybe 6. I think I lost interest when I started to lose interest when I knew that Holden and Ford, as they were known, were going to leave. So I have definitely not been paying attention for like 3, 4, 5 years. But going last week was fun. Joseph's gone on about the name of the track. I think it was a pretty cool track. I haven't been there since we were kids, so I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's got the nostalgia or the the international fame of Bathurst, but it seems like like a much more accessible venue, that's for sure. Easy to walk around, good vantage points, pretty cheap. Entry wasn't too pricey. I'd like to go there for an event to see the whole place packed, because it was, it was pretty busy, but it wasn't like packed. So it'd be pretty interesting to see what it'd be like, absolutely packed for a massive event. But no,
I
yeah, I
think a few
enjoyed it.
people would have been turned away because of the rain as well, or the threat of
Yeah.
rain all day.
Yeah, I get
Because
that.
even us, we were kind of last minute, like, let's just go and see what happens.
And the fact there was 3 events 3 weeks before.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Normally you've got
Yeah.
one weekend of racing there, and everyone kind of just goes to the one.
Yeah. Nah, but
But-
to all honesty, yeah, in all honesty, I think I can get back onto the whole bandwagon of it. Tom, I was talking to Thomas today, and he was saying that Camaros will be coming in soon. So if it becomes like a Camaro Mustang thing, I suppose there's a bit of interest there for me, because it's kind of like two brands that are historically pitted against each other. So yeah,
What are you
I
laughing at, Joey?
found it interesting.
What have you found amusing?
It's the way he's speaking about it.
What's so funny?
I don't know. It's just very, very matter of fact.
It hasn't been something that I would say I've been massively enthused about for years. I mean, I watch Bathurst, but that's about it. I can't remember the last time I watched just a normal round of supercars. So I mean, and I'm not going to come here and pretend I know, because I haven't got the background. So I'd like to just watch a full season, learn some of the races, the brands, the drivers, and then go from there next year.
Who have you picked as a team to support, Michael?
Oh, look, I bought a hat last week, so it looks like I'm sticking with Ampol.
Nice.
Simple. HRT, Team Red Bull.
Yep.
Mm,
Is that who it is now? HRT is now Team Red Bull.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So Holden, or not even, sorry, it's not HRT anymore, because Holden's pulled out.
Yeah,
So now
yeah.
it's just going to be Red Bull Ampol Racing. Getting into some specifics, Joe. So I guess we'll take the lead of the conversation from here. Thinking about the month's racing that we viewed, I've made mention already of the fact that there's obviously some teams that traditionally perform better at SMP than others. Brad Jones Racing has done well there for the last few years, and they kind of did the same thing pretty much for the whole month. Penske,
Dick
obviously,
Johnson Racing now, DJR.
Yeah, DJR. Erebus was really strong for the whole month. I didn't expect it, but they were. As a ticketed fan, I wasn't really too impressed with the fact that we're racing for a month there, and that was pretty much the case. I mean, obviously, Cam Waters had an awesome race on Saturday night, where he kind of drove the wheels off that car to even get it to finish on the podium. But by and large, we didn't see much variation in teams improving. I mean, it seems like the teams that were stronger there stayed stronger, and the teams that were weaker there improved in relation to the distance from the front, but it didn't really improve in relation to finishing position. So what did you think about that, mate?
I think what we saw initially in the first week was that Erebus rolled off the trucks really locked in, and also Dick Johnson Racing rolled off really locked in. Like they were probably the two highest rises from probably the year at large.
Yeah.
Red Bull's been the best team this year, and so it was no surprise seeing them at the front. And then it was a surprise seeing Chaz and Cam struggle a bit, because they've really been second and third, or third and fourth for most of the year. And I don't think having the 4 races back to back helped them that much in terms of their championship push. And
There's traditionally teams also that do better at street circuits.
They are, but also with the short races, if you have a bad short race, fair enough, but usually you head back to another track and you can sort of right the ship. Whereas when you're racing at the same track again and again and again, the teams that are locked in from the start can just keep locking in, where it takes the other teams a bit more time to sort of find their footing. And what we also discussed was in the long races, usually the cream rises to the top, because what you lack in outright pace, you can sort of work a
Build in
strategy around
consistency.
getting some clean air, early pit stops, and we saw that on the Saturday night when Tickford ran the
Soft tire early.
soft tire early and got a massive lead. And if it hadn't been for the rain late in the race, I dare say that Cam Waters would have won the race. But also we saw it with Chaz Moster in the Walkinshaw, that they didn't run that strategy, but with the longer race and getting some clean air, you can really sort of stretch your legs and do what, like, sort of take the onus, like, on the driver, rather than it just being about a car on rails.
Well, he moved
And
from 11th up to, I think it was
third,
5th, wasn't it?
or fifth,
third.
third
It wasn't
or
third.
fourth.
Cam Waters was third.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't bad weekends for them who I think we expected better from, because Chaz had that second place in the week before in that rain race as well.
Yep.
But I feel like they suffered the most from their overall championship having to do the four-peat.
Well,
and
I'm
then
looking at,
on the flip side, Anton De Pasquale probably had the best stretch of this year, and really showed what Dick Johnson Racing saw in him to bring him over this year. And also Will Davidson showed, he's been consistent all year, but showed even more so what, like, Dick Johnson Racing have seen in him to bring him over as well.
I'm just looking at so again, for people that haven't been following the supercars all season, so the 4 races at Sydney Motorsport Park over the last month kind of had their own Sydney Cup associated to it as well. So there was a championship within a championship, and I'm just looking at the results. So obviously, Shane Van Gisbergen won the whole event. That was probably due to the fact that Anton had, I think, 2 races where one of them there was a pit stop issue. The other one, I think he was disqualified from the race. He finished in second, 73 points behind, which isn't a whole lot. Tied with Jamie Whincup, but 4th place went to Will Brown, and I think that's one of the great stories over the last month. Erebus really have gone from being probably the 3rd best team in supercars just 2 years ago, with the Penrite backing and having Reynolds and De Pasquale, to kind of losing their way a little bit. And this year they brought 2 young drivers in that have both shown how quick they are, but haven't really stitched it together over the course of the season. But I think what this month showed is, number one, that Will Brown is an epic racer, and that he's also got the moxie to battle with those people at the front. So that was really impressive to see. Obviously, Will Davison finished the round for that championship in 5th, which is, again, good to see a driver who's, lost his drive last year through no fault of his own, just with sponsorship issues, coming back in the championship and showing that he's still got what it takes. And then Nick Percat in 7th. I think the fact that he is continually outperforming his car and the team that he's driving for. Brad Jones has a tradition of pulling some races out of the bag, but I think with him going to Walkinshaw and Andretti next year, they've got an absolute steal of a driver, and I think someone that can push Chaz, which is what that team needs to keep moving forward. Just before we move on from that, just being at the race on Saturday night, and obviously having the threat of rain, but also just the fact that it was a night race, which is an awesome spectacle in and of itself. I think that was, as a fan, just an epic event to be at. Constantly throughout the race, we had the live timing going. We were counting, the seconds to see how much of a gap that Waters was able to pull on the rest of the field, knowing that they were going to come back at him at the end of the race. And I think what that race showed, number one, I want to see more races with a hard tire, and rather than the soft, the super soft, just because the difference in delta times is so much more dramatic. So it doesn't matter. Like it creates more of a spectacle, because the distance that's being gained and then obviously reduced is so much bigger. But then I also think that there's a whole level of tire management that isn't so distinguished just with the soft and a hard. So I think that was a pretty awesome thing to view as well, and just to be there live for. It's probably we've been to a few supercars races over the last few years, and I think that was by far the most memorable one to actually be in attendance of. How did you see that.
I thought that what you're saying is 100% correct. It was an amazing spectacle, and the strategy really played into it. I also think the weekend before there was a full night race in the rain, which really demonstrated just the overall sort of high caliber of driving that's in the championship now. I mean, I've never seen a race with that much water that there was no real incidents, which was amazing.
And glare. I mean,
Um,
that's another thing that you got to
And the
take in.
glare, that's right. It was such a gnarly looking race, and everyone drove to their credit really well, really high caliber of racing. But also from what we saw on Saturday, I think in terms of the overall package, just for a fan, the support categories that they put on show as well was really good. And I mean, we fell in love with those S5000 cars just because they sound so wild. Also touching back on quickly what you said with Nick Percat and Will Brown, and also I think the other young Erebus driver, Brody Kostecki, I think them three over the last month have really shone through as, I mean, they've all had very good seasons leading up to now, but I think they've really capped what's going to be the end of the season really well, regardless what happens at Bathurst. They really put their best foot forward. I mean, Will Brown got his first win. I think Brody got a pole and a podium as well. And I think that in terms of where we were looking at Erebus at the start of the year with these two rookie young kids, we can see real growth and potential for growth for the coming years as well, because neither of them have really put a foot wrong. But what do you think about what I said before about the whole spectacle of the overall supports, Harry?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Someone's like cooking in the background or something.
I really enjoyed the S5000. That was the race where Aaron Cameron came second. I can't remember who won the race. There was an incident with the Valvoline car. He spun at turn one. Joey Mawson tried to overtake someone, and they bumped into him, and he managed to battle his way through a couple of spots as well. Like, it was just really good racing. I really enjoyed that race, and the Super 2 cars were awesome too. Those, and with the Super 3 cars in the same field, I just thought that was, again, really good racing, really good spectacle. So, across the board, I think it was a really good night.
I think that's probably, before we move into Bathurst, I think we'll also just make the point, because we haven't really done it, of the fact that Van Gisbergen's already won the championship going into the last race of the season. So, I mean, he's had an absolutely phenomenal season. It's kind of gone like clockwork for him. I think in the past, one thing that we have seen from Van Gisbergen is that at some events, through fault of his own at times, but also unforeseen circumstances, he can have off weekends. And that kind of has impacted his ability to obviously win championships against McLaughlin. It probably doesn't help that McLaughlin is so good as well. But I think this year he's just put together a really good performance. It took, I think, 6 races for someone to actually get a win over him, which is insane. But I think props have to go there. And just before we move on, I'm just looking at the championship standings just to back up a few things that we've said before. We've got obviously the 2 Red Bull drivers, first and second. Will Davidson, funnily enough, is in 3rd in the Supercars Championship right now, which is a really good showing, considering that he's kind of been brought in there to be the number 2. Then they've got Chaz and Cam in 4th and 5th. Anton De Pasquale's moved up in the championship to 6th. And then we've got the people we're just talking about. So we've got Nick Percat in 7th. Will Brown has moved up to 8th. Mark Winterbottom is in the top 10, which is great to see for Team 18. And then Brody Kostecki, just to back up what we're saying about how well these young Erebus drivers have done this year, rounds out the top 10. So with that, I think it's probably time to talk about the biggest race of the year, so Bathurst. And obviously we're recording this on a Monday night, and the track action, if you're watching on Foxtel or Kayo, is going to be available starting from tomorrow. So we've got practices for TCR, for S5000, for GT World Challenge Australia, all kicking off tomorrow. So if you're at work and you've got a spare screen or a second screen, you might want to chuck Foxtel onto the second screen for the next few days, because it's going to be an absolute festival of speed as Joseph talks to his wife behind the camera. But this is going to be the most epic week of racing, I think, in Australian sport for a long time. And there's a lot to talk about. Where would you suggest that we begin, Joey, breaking down the Bathurst 1000?
Well, I think that the whole idea of this festival of speed is amazing. Like, just we've been so, what's the word, robbed of motorsport for the last couple of months. I think that
For the last year.
Yeah, but like we had motorsport at the start of the years, and we thought, oh, we're over this hump, and then now this. I think we're talking too early again with this new coronavirus strain that's coming into the country.
No.
But I mean, the Festival of Speed, I think, is an amazing idea. We've got TCRs, we've got GTs, they've got S5000s. I don't know if they've got Trans Ams there, which is my other new, another category love of mine. I mean, it's going to be, 5 days? 5 days of constant racing. I mean, I'm happy to talk about supercars first, but I think just for me, seeing those S5000s go over the top of the mountain is going to be a real something really special to watch. I mean, we haven't seen like a open wheeler go across the top since, what was it, Jensen Button's sort of fun run a couple,
the McLaren
10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Do you guys, just a quick question, do you guys think that motorsport in general in this country has increased in popularity over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I really do.
Why do you think that? Like, I definitely feel it has, but...
Can I answer that question first?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two things. I think the first thing is supercars has been a constant. I think there's probably argument to say that it's increased its spectacle over the last 5 years, and before that it was in a little bit of a lull. But I think what we are seeing now in Australia is a number of categories that are being introduced to the racing scene that are quite affordable. I think the first thing is, if we think about TCR, we've obviously spoken to Aaron Cameron about that just a few weeks ago, and that's become a very viable option for racing. The parity is really good, but also it's a very affordable category as well. I think S5000 is trying to do the same thing, and that's really starting to gain traction also because you've got teams like GRM who are really well-established categories in Australia, pushing hard, number one, to get young drivers in seats, and number two, to do whatever they can to assist in the maintenance of those cars. So that's another thing. I think we're seeing the GT category in Australia grow as well. Kind of, it's happening in Europe, so it's taken a little bit of time to trickle to Australia. But I think now the fact that the Australian GT Championship has linked up with World Challenge, which is obviously the SRO championship that started in Europe, is making that more viable as well. So I think what we're seeing is a number of motorsport categories entering the company that are a lot more viable. And a lot of those drivers that tried to make it in supercars that for whatever reason can't, due to not having the skill set or just not having the funds, have got these other, categories that they can race in, even if it's on a part-time level. I think that's really what's doing it for Australia.
I've got a totally different take on this.
I've got a theory.
Well, you tell us your theory first, mate.
My theory
Looks like you
touches
just woke up.
Look, my theory touches a little bit on what Anthony said. I think the more we have categories that are popular overseas coming to Australia, that can only be a good thing. Like, I know how much we all enjoy going up to Bathurst for the GT3 Enduros, but I'd have to say there has to be some credence given to the success or relative success of Australian riders, racers, drivers in elite categories overseas, like Harry's boy Daniel Ricciardo. Surely he brings more attention to this to Australian motorsport and to motorsport enthusiasts. And our best friend Thriller Miller, And now, you know, next year with Remy Gardner, surely, you know, the likes of these
Piastri.
yep. You know, surely that has some pull on
Even sorry, just to cut you off. Even
creating
guys like
interest in motorsport.
even guys like Matt Campbell, I think, are going abroad. And what's the other guy we were talking about last week, Anthony? Jackson Evans.
Yeah.
Going over, if you know who they are and then you see them on the world stage, it's a big deal as well. But
And McLaughlin.
Yeah, and McLaughlin going to IndyCar. I mean, you can't second guess that. But mine's a totally different take. I honestly believe this from the from like every inch of me. If you watch other motorsport from around the world, there is not many categories. No, I'm gonna tell you this is passion now. There are not
Every
many.
inch of you.
Every
there are
inch.
not-
Are we still talking about motorsport or?
listen.
Listen,
There are
Linda,
not-
listen.
There are not many categories who present their product like supercars do, and this is going to cover everything. If you watch like an international motorsport, I would say the only products that you get that are a better show on the television are Formula One and MotoGP and maybe NASCAR, in terms of the amount of data that they actually present to the customer.
Maybe
In
WEC
terms-
as well, Joe.
What was that?
Indy.
Maybe World Endurance as well.
No, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not just about the data, and it's not just. I'm telling you this.
Every fiber of his
How
being is
many-
invested in
how-
this answer.
If it's not about the actual sport, it's about the show. The V8 supercars have got such a good way of showing the sport in terms of camera angles, curbside angles, slow mos, inboard
Yeah.
Inboard
cameras.
I do
They've
like
got-
those inboards.
They've got the camera underneath the rear tire that shows the rear shock working. They are very ingenuitive with the way they actually present it, and this has been sort of getting better over the last couple of years since they've been with Foxtel, getting the Foxtel money.
See,
And
I
then
think that I was going to mention. Do you think that there's, you know, they lost viewership because of moving to Foxtel? I don't know. Like, I think there was merit
I
to
don't-
having that free to wear.
I don't think so, but I'm not finished my point. Give me a second. Sorry.
And then I want to piggyback off.
Sorry,
you.
this is
so
a really
I've
I've got
important point.
something
I've
to say.
literally
So
I've had an
they've-
epiphany.
They've put together an amazing product to watch, right? And which wasn't the case a couple of years ago. And then ever since supercars then got the rights to showing the Bathurst 12-hour, which was probably a couple of years ago as well, they've brought all that infrastructure onto the biggest international motorsport race we hold here in terms of non-Formula One MotoGP, which is now the Bathurst 12-hour. So they've literally just cherry-picked all the good things that they have here, which is world-class, and put it onto a world-class stream that is broadcast internationally.
All around the world, yeah.
Internationally.
Do you also think having people like Andretti and, you know, Zach Brown and all these big international people investing in the sport, do you think that's also helped?
I honestly,
Go, Anthony.
I was talking about the fact that
Answer
there's
Harry's
these-
question, though.
yeah, I am. I am going to answer the question.
Had an epiphany.
To answer your question, I think no, that's not the answer. I don't think that plays as much of a role. However, if we think about these categories in Europe that I was talking about before, TCR, GT racing, that have kind of trickled into Australia over the last couple of years, I think the fact that they have been so accessible to people in Australia. I mean, if you want to watch GT racing, it's live and free on YouTube. You can watch any GT race, you know, live. Same thing with TCR. So it's extremely accessible. I think the fact that we've seen IndyCar now have every race put on Foxtel, a similar thing is happening. So I think the fact that there's so much more access to these categories,
DTM?
yeah, DTM as well. The fact that there's so much more access to these categories means that it's more of a consideration for Australian drivers. And then, like Joseph was saying before about the Bathurst 12-hour, I mean, the first time we went to the 12-hour, we really had no understanding of the concept of GT racing, just how much it was done overseas. We went to that first event and we literally got hooked to it, right? We started following it in Europe. We started following, GT, all these other categories of GT racing as well. It was very much a catalyst. And I think video games also plays a huge role in that these days. Because if I look at a GT car and I get interested in that particular category, it's very easy for me then to find a game and I can start racing it and buy a simulator and have a bit of fun as
Formula
well.
One.
Same as Formula One. So I think those things have actually done a lot for the sport in Australia, but also around the world. The access that people have to, number one, watch the event, interact with the event, and then in a weird way reenact the event themselves, has done a huge thing for, number one, making people more aware of those categories. Number two, broadening their exposure globally, because it's not just in Australia that we're seeing a boom in these categories, it's also around the world. And I think Australia, even though it's booming for us now, we're probably a little bit late to the party just because it's taken a little bit of time to trickle down. And then also the fact that I think video games have done a huge thing in relation to getting people that can't afford to get into racing or have, no interest in doing it and putting money into it, but they can do it virtually. That's a huge aspect as well. And I think the internet, the fact that people can jump on a server now and race against each other, just keeps fertilizing that particular passion for the sport.
I think Drive to Survive's had a massive influence too.
Oh,
I know it's
100%.
Formula One based, but I think it's
Yeah.
opened people's eyes to motorsport in general.
100%.
Drive to Survive has been probably the biggest, I think, like the biggest game changer in terms of just
Making more people
motorsport.
aware of motorsport.
Man,
Yep.
there's a podcast I listen to occasionally, and then I saw one of the titles for the YouTube video was about Formula One. I was like, what do these geese know about Formula One? And I started listening to it, and it was based all on Drive to Survive. I was like, man, I wonder if these guys actually watch the race, like what they'd think about it, other than just this TV show. Like it actually has spread so much information.
I can tell
about the
you,
sport.
hand on heart, that in the last 12 months, no lie, hand on heart, I promise. People
This
that
pod has been so funny. Joseph saying every fiber of his being,
Every inch.
every inch of
I'll
his
be honest
being,
with you,
hand on
it's-
heart.
in the
So
past,
emotional.
All six of
before
them.
Drive to Survive, before Drive to Survive, you were very much in a niche category of people that
100%.
knew anything about Formula One, right? Very much so. Now, in the last literally 12 months, hand on heart, I've probably got 10 people that I know, and that kind of, they're in my circle of friends, family, etc., that had no interest in Formula One, you never would have even considered that they would be interested in it, that have become diehard fans purely from watching Drive to Survive. And COVID probably helped that, because people were at home, they had 3 seasons of this show that they could binge, and all of a sudden they're like, this sport is actually awesome, and motorsport has a lot more to it than just the quote unquote people driving around in circles that the uneducated like to throw at us educated folk.
As an example, I've known Michael for 6-7 years now. We had no idea that we both liked motorsport until probably 3 years ago.
Why was that?
I felt isolated. Like I didn't think anyone liked motorsport.
I think it was
You know,
because I bloody came
Yeah,
started
probably that
working
too.
with you boys.
We used to argue about football all the time. The Liverpool Man United sort of
Were
rivalry.
you guys both in the closet?
Yeah. Just
I agree. Like I agree with everything that's been said. I think social media has played a massive role. Like everything's accessible now. You can follow anything on social media. News is in real time. I mean, you guys are talking about Drive to Survive. Like motorsport, has, you could make the case, traditionally has had a large male following. But you look at the trends now. Obviously, there's been large female followings too. But you could make the case that a lot more women, girls, are getting into the sport as well.
Because of the pretty boys.
And that's not even
That's true.
a slight on. We're talking about before, Harry. You're talking about your partner being interested in Daniel Ricciardo for multiple reasons, we can say, but that's not something that's uncommon. I mean,
Well, we got two
I've got
sisters.
3 sisters who all of a sudden follow F1 religiously and had never mentioned anything about motorsport in their life till about 3 years ago. But this is what I'm talking about. The access now is phenomenal. And I suppose that's what I was saying before, like Joseph was mentioning about the fantastic coverage of supercars with Fox. And it's true. I mean, you watch it, it is a fantastic package to watch. It always has been. Brilliant commentary, graphics that are fantastic, in-depth breakdowns of every aspect of the race. But is that also something that limits the exposure of supercars as a brand outside of Australia? Because Anthony, you just mentioned that SRO GT3. I can hop on YouTube, watch some of the biggest races in the world. 24 hours of Spa. We're about to watch the 9 hours, the 12 hours of Kyalami, whatever it is, 12, 9. I can't remember, but
9 hours.
9 hours. But how easy is that? You can just hop onto YouTube. You can stream from YouTube. Cast it, whatever. I find that brilliant because I don't have to pay a cent. I can watch awesome racing. That maybe it's not presented as well as our supercars package, but it's at a standard that is very, very high. Is that where supercars has to kind of look to expand in the future to make it all access again? Because I know for myself, one of the biggest reasons, apart from the fact that Holden and Ford were discontinued in supercars, that I stopped watching, was because it wasn't on free to air. And I know that sounds silly, but I didn't have Fox for a while, and it just fell off my radar. So is that something that supercars has to get back? Does it have to have that greater access to?
Yeah, you go first.
If you look at first and foremost, I think what you said is it's true. Like when you take something off free to air, you definitely are limiting the amount of eyes that you have on your product, 100%. The funny thing, the reason I got KO Foxtel originally was I wanted to be able to. I wanted to watch supercars whenever I wanted, but I also wanted to be able to support it in terms of paying for the Foxtel coverage that I was putting my money where my mouth was, in terms of I was actually paying to watch it, and like it wouldn't be on me if the sport lost revenue or lost the ability to show itself. I think what you're talking about though is a different argument. It's because GT racing, number one, is a cheaper form of racing to do than supercars. The budget is not even comparable, like realistically, not even comparable. And the money that it takes for those cars to go racing is brought in through mostly the gentleman driver initiative that's in GT racing, which is one of the smartest ways to keep your grids full and keep the sport running. And
explain that for me. Explain that concept of gentleman driver.
All right, so gentleman driver is, you're a rich man, you want to race a race car, you pay the entry fee for the drivers to race the car with you, because there's in the structure of the sport, there's bronze
like Pro-Am.
Pro-Am.
And AM.
Yeah, so you need to have gentleman drivers in there to actually race the car. You need to have that ranking. You can't just race full pros.
Yeah.
So the sport is built off this model that you can keep these cars on the grid with the money brought in by the gentleman driver.
Yep.
And the whole philosophy behind the SRO GT racing is that we aren't putting on a show for the fans. We're putting on a show for the drivers, the gentleman drivers, and whatever we get after that, which is the show for the fans, is a sort of like a bonus for the fans kind of thing.
Can I just piggyback off you for a second as well?
Yeah.
I think that's an awesome point. I just want to extrapolate on that further. The other thing that GT racing has, and if anyone is listening that has not really gone into has no interest yet in GT racing, get yourself into that particular. It is the golden goose, I think, of motorsport racing in general. Because what you have, and this is something that supercars will always struggle with, is you've got multiple manufacturers that have all participating in this one category, and they can bring whatever sports car that they have, whether it's a V6 or a V10 or a V12, whatever it might be, and they will get that car, provided that they can sell the car and a certain amount of units. I think it might be 100 units of that car. They will get that car homologated. The other thing that supercars doesn't have that GT racing has, you've got the gentleman driver aspect. So if I want to go racing for a year, let's say the budget is I don't know, $1 million. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just saying, imagine it's $1 million. They can fund that. They've got the team and the infrastructure to do so. What also exists in GT racing is huge manufacturer support for teams, and they will obviously provide the pro driver for an amateur team to obviously assist in that racing too. And I think what you've got in GT racing now is a very strong connection between the category and those manufacturers in a very real way. So you've got, Porsche investing, and obviously the pro team lineups, obviously putting money into the sport in that way as well. So they're getting a lot of money into that sport, so that they don't really need money coming in from payer revenue, if that makes sense. Money's coming in from the manufacturers and from the people the money's coming in from the people that are driving. Whereas in supercars, the money that's coming in from the TV is needed to keep people driving, if that makes sense.
I think
So
there's
it's kind of
something.
a flipped system.
I think there's something to say when you've got high, historic, high-powered brands competing with a balance of performance car or balance of performance cars that compete so evenly at historic tracks, historic circuits. It is.
I'm going to say this quickly. There is no category, and this is true. There is no category that has so many different cars, and this is not like the GT. I'm not talking about GT. I'm talking about supercars. Each car is built by the team, and they look like Holdens and Fords at the moment, not Mustangs and Camaros soon. But at the moment, there is no category that has so many different built cars in different workshops that run as evenly as supercars. Supercars as a spectacle in terms of lap times for teams and cars on the day that can actually win a race in terms of that kind of championship is second to none. Like if you go through the list of cars on the grid and go, if the circumstances are right, this car can win, this car can win, this car can win, this car can win. There's nothing like it before you start.
Isn't that fascinating? Because I actually never knew that. There you go. But isn't that interesting that in supercars? So just explain to me.
Before we explain it,
yeah, go for it.
Before we explain it, sorry.
So that's going to change, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to change, and that's a good segue into what we wanted to talk about as well. So up to this point, the R&D that is involved in supercars is, the figures on the money that's spent on it is astronomical, right? They're obviously developing their own cars, they're developing their own engines. Everything that is being put onto that supercar is bespoke to the team that's designing it. They own the IP, etc. What will happen with Gen 3, which makes it a lot more affordable, and this is probably, if you make racing more affordable, then you might have the chance later on to make it free to wear, is you're going to have a lot more parts on the supercar that are uniform. So for example, the engines that are being produced, no longer a team's going to have their own engine shops to build and rebuild their own engines. The engines are going to be rebuilt by supercars or someone that builds the engine for supercars. You take 300,000 grand or 300 grand off the overall price of running an engine just in a season, or I don't know if it's the overall price to purchase a unit, but you've got a lot more parts now that are going to be, we purchase them and use them, as opposed to we have to design them and we have to R&D them and develop them and improve them, etc.
So at the moment, this is sort of how it was described on Supercars a couple of weeks ago. So at the moment, let's say there's 4 teams that run Commodores. You've got the Ampol Racing, which is 888. You've got Walkinshaw, you've got Erebus, and you've got Brad Jones Racing. You can't pull one of the engines out of one of those cars and put it in another one. It won't fit, because it's not just the engine, it's also the bottom of the engine, how the airbox attaches to it, how the sumps attach to it. They're all bespoke to. It's all bespoke to the team. So unless you're a customer of like Walkinshaw, and which is Erebus is, but only for the engine, even they can't fit a Walkinshaw engine into their car anymore, because even the way it connects to the gearbox is all bespoke. So now with the new rules coming in the new Gen 3 era,
2023,
you'll be able to pull out the engine off a Walkinshaw car and drop it straight into a 888 car, and it'll fit straight in there.
So I find that so bizarre.
which in some ways I feel is sad. I'm sad about it because the sort of the engineering prowess and even stuff like Walkinshaw is very famous for having engines that can that are very good on fuel. So on long races like Bathurst and Clipsal and stuff like that, they always have really good fuel mileage.
Fuel economy.
And fuel economy is second to none. So you're going to lose stuff like that, which is sort of give and take in this whole new idea or this whole new way that supercars is going to be done. But at the same time, if you're cutting out 40% of the running prices of the sport, it's going to make it a lot more of a enticing not what's the word, enticing, what's the word for getting new people into the sport?
Intriguing.
Prospect for getting new teams and keeping teams in the sport. 100%. Like,
So-
you can't disagree with that.
So just to clarify, how long have supercars been like that?
Spoke
What, like bespoke engines?
Yeah.
Since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
forever.
So
Like Larry
they've, so
Perkins
they've
had a-
always, so even, back in Scafie's days and things like that,
Yeah,
so,
back then,
none of the Commodores had the same engines or
top-
anything
They
like
had
that.
the same
the top end of
chassis.
they come from the same, like the
Saudi.
engine is built off the same base engine, but how everything attaches to it. Like, honestly, one of the best things to watch is last
Racing.
year's Kelly Racing web doco, where they talk about building the Mustang and the whole process of getting the top half of the Mustang engine homologated and then put onto the bottom half of their old Nissan engine, because that's just their engineering, and they fit it on there and it shows the whole process that goes through, and it's a real fascinating
There's a really
fascinating
good,
watch.
there's a really good, I think 3 or 4 part series, I think by Crompton,
No,
or
Larko.
Larkham, sorry,
Larko's
Larkham,
doing it.
explaining the Gen 3 engines and how they're gonna, how they are different and how they can all be
They've-
retrofitted to the set, to
They've
different cars. Yeah, really interesting. It's currently
know-
on YouTube now. I should put the link up if we can.
One other thing, people like,
Yeah.
one other thing that seems to be a bee in people's bonnet, and it's also the case with like Formula One, with there being the new regulations and more parts that aren't manufactured by teams to cut costs. Right? People are always worried that cutting costs and making more parts uniform amongst the categories is going to in some way dilute the racing. I think what we can see now in other categories around the world, whether it be GT racing or TCR or even something like S5000 now, is that even if you've got a category where cars, I buy the car and I run the car in whatever setting it is, right? That has not in no way diluted motorsport in general. You've still got teams that perform well. You've probably got more teams that perform well, but the racing is just as intriguing, to be perfectly honest with you. And a lot of the things that are being cut, a lot of the costs that are being cut, we're talking about creating fractions of a second of performance where they can be all uniform anyway. So I think it's going to do great things for the sport. Hopefully it allows the sport to put a little bit more of the money that they will hopefully be saving and making back into the fans, making it even more accessible to them. We've obviously seen that even this year, Supercars has a new partnership agreement with Channel 7 to get more races on free to air. So obviously it's not every race, but it's a lot more than it had been in the past. And that's the first time in a long time that we've had any other races apart from Bathurst on free to air. So they're obviously making strides there to kind of engage that market that won't purchase pay TV or whatever it might be. So I think in general, that's a really good thing for supercars. And if anything, Gen 3 is going to make it a lot more like some of those categories that we've been talking about now, where, if I can afford a car, to purchase a car, it probably brings more teams into the sport, because we've got 24 cars on the grid now. And I think supercars is, wanting to have 30 cars on the grid, hopefully. And we've already seen, people like the Peter Adderton, who owns Boost Mobile, talking about purchasing a team. He's been sponsoring teams for quite a long time. But once Gen 3 comes out, he's ready to purchase a car, purchase a team, just because it's a lot more financially viable. So that's another great thing to see with supercars as well. Now, before we wrap up, we probably need to just briefly
Harry
talk
had
about.
something to say to
Oh,
you.
sorry. I think he was pointing up at an icon that we are going to put a link in. Was that
Yeah,
right?
well,
Oh,
I
okay.
think he was just pointing up because I mentioned that we should throw that
Yeah.
those Lycum clips up.
But quickly speaking of Gen 3, so I was doing some reading on the new technical regs. And one of the things that stood out was the fact that the chassis are going to be universal.
Yeah.
And that's the one that's being developed is going to be similar in size to the road going versions of the cars.
Yep.
Firstly, do you think that's going to entice more brands like Toyota, who's seen their motorsport division grow in the last couple of years with the GR and the GR racing?
The chassis has been universal before this. Like the chassis at the moment are universal. They're just built for those bigger sedans.
cars,
And all they're saying now is
I
they're
think
dropping
they're bringing it
roof
down.
height.
Yeah.
So you
and
can fit more chassis on it.
And I think what they're saying is the a lot of the key panels and glass on the cars are going to be the same as the road going version of the car. So a lot of it is kind of tailored more towards real life. So do you think teams like Toyota, I can't think of any other manufacturer off the top of my head. I know Nissan's dumped out recently, but do you think?
I think Nissan could come back.
The sad thing is, if you think, I was thinking about this, the new 400Z would fit on these regs really well. The new Toyota Supra would fit on these regs really well.
Kia Stinger,
even like
BMW
all the
M4.
cars that have left, but even like I was thinking about the categories that have left. So Nissan would fit better on there. The old Mercedes would fit better on there. And you're going to see the Mustang's going to fit better on there. So these this whole chassis change has been being spoke about for so long, and obviously this stuff takes a long time to change. But it's sort of a bit of, I hope we can see more brands come in, because I think this is what we needed 5 years ago, and it's 5 years too late.
I think
hindsight is a powerful tool.
I guess
sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I just guess my question also is like the Holden and Ford kind of rivalry is now mute, I guess, because the whole point of that was the cars were built here in Australia by us. Now that they're going to be Camaras and Mustangs, it's not really, hasn't got that tribal factor anymore.
I think you've still got a good.
We've had many years of Mustang versus Camaro in Australia, in Australian touring cars as well.
Prior to that, I think it's not going to. I think the fact that there's still a GM base and a Ford base is not going to. I don't think that will change a whole lot, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think, if anything, from what we've been hearing about from Ford and GM, they as manufacturers are both, recommitting and reinvesting in the sport, which is something that hasn't happened for quite a while. So obviously, since Ford's brought the new Mustang in, they've invested somewhat. But I think now that we're seeing the Mustang look a lot more like the cars that they're trying to sell on the road, teams are a lot more interested in that investment and kind of getting involved. And hopefully, as Joe was saying, the fact that, if you look at the Mustang now, it looks like a bit of a bastard car, to be honest with you. It's too high for what it looks like on the road.
Shit from the back.
Yeah. The rear end looks weird.
I hate it.
So hopefully the fact that the chassis is going to suit a lot more of the sedans that we see on the road, where you've kind of got a little bit of a lower height to the car than they have in the past. That should hopefully entice more people to invest in the category. Regardless,
that's why everyone that's why I think we grew up loving V8 supercars, because it looked like the Commodores and XR8s that you'd see on the road, hotted up and with liveries on. You could relate to the car. It was very easy to take sides. It was tribalist, it was very tribal. And I think it kind of lost its way. It kind of lost its way a bit. So I think any kind of moves to making them look more like the road version of a car is positive.
Another thing on that, what you're saying, Harry, is there's murmurings of supercars building their own engine as like a third option, in terms of being able to, if a manufacturer wants to come in but doesn't want to have to commit to like building its own engine, just you have a homologated engine from supercars, you can just drop it in there. We've seen that in British touring cars for a couple of years, that you can sort of just get this homologated engine it's built to the power specs and just drop it and just literally drop it into the car. Even now
Even if
with
you've got
the how
even if
super
you've got a team that, for example, let's say Walkinshaw didn't want to run a Camaro, and then they obviously purchased, let's just say, hypothetically, they purchased some BMW M4s, and BMW said, yeah, you can run our chassis in supercars. They could buy that car, run the panels the same way they had. If it fits onto the base chassis, then they would be able to just throw that supercar engine in without having to pay for the development or anything like that. And then you've got a BMW racing in supercars as well. So it makes it.
That's what I'm saying with how supercars are now doing all the spec work on these engines. Getting a third option, or even you could even theoretically just drop one of these Camaro or Mustang engines into it as well. But the way these engines are being done by supercars is so pinpoint. Like if you watch the thing, the center of gravity is the same. The power, the power and torque curves are the same. Like the possibilities, well, they were always endless, but are even better suited for that kind of stuff and keeping the cost down for new manufacturers. Is that what you're going to say, T?
Yeah, something like that. You know what? This is being sold as a bloody Bathurst review, and we've said about 3 sentences about Bathurst. So let's try to quickly preview the great race before Michael's bedtime.
Yeah, come on, boys. Seriously.
But
Got to tend to his finches.
So this is the greatest race of the year, and we haven't spoken enough about it. So Bathurst starting at a later time this year for the first time in a while. I think it's starting at midday. It's probably going to finish at the crack of 6 o'clock, I think, just to get all the racing in that we need to. We've got probably the biggest.
6 will finish at 7.
Oh, you reckon it'll
It's
finish
always
that
over
late?
6
Yeah,
hours.
usually
I guess the fact that
finishes
you've
at around 5.
The fact that we've got so much sunlight now, because it's so late in the year, is probably useful as well. All right, where do we want to begin with this? Joey, let's start with you. I'm going to ask you a question. What 3 driver lineups do you think are going to perform the strongest? Do you want me to share the driver lineups on the screen for you guys?
You can if you want, yeah.
I'm going to share my screen so you can have a look at
fancy.
driver
Actually,
lineups.
no, don't do that, Anthony, because that's going to stuff up the recording, isn't it? The recording time.
It shouldn't, because you've still
No,
got. It'll still be on gallery view. It'll be on gallery view.
The recording shows what you're showing, so you'll be fine. What you can do is you can make the screen even larger and make a smaller it.
I'll just do the stop share then. All right, that'll do.
All right. Just pull out your phone and do it.
Tell me what teams. What are the strongest driver lineups that you can see coming into this weekend?
I think always Triple Eight has always got amazing lineups.
Yeah.
Number one, they always the first in. And they always get great lineups.
They've got Van Gisbergen and Tander in the 97, is it?
Yeah.
And then they've got Whincup and Lowndes in the 88.
What else? What more do you want? I mean, I'd love to see Whincup and Lowndes go out with one more dub. I mean, Whincup's sort of been shortchanged at Bathurst a little bit. He's got 4, I think, or 3 or 4, but he definitely could or should have more with the amount of championships he's got.
I like the Chaz Mostert, Lee Holdsworth lineup. Looks like a killer.
I love that lineup. I think Walkinshaw getting Lee into the team is a real sign of intent for them.
Yeah.
Especially they've had Luff, who's been really good with play last year. I think he's still going to be in there.
Still going to be with Bryce Forward. Yeah.
Yeah, but that Holdsworth and Chaz lineup, especially just how that car has been doing this year and how dialed in Chaz has been this year, I think that definitely is I don't know if you'd call it a dark horse, but definitely is one of the lower favourites, that's for sure.
I'll give you 2 dark horses that I think are going to be epic lineups. Number 1, Scott Pye and James Golding.
Yeah.
For Team 18, but then also the other Team 18 lineup of Winterbottom and Caruso. I think Team 18 have 2 bulletproof lineups, which is really good to see for them. And then obviously we've got the 2 leading Tickford lineups of Waters and Moffat. I mean, Moffat's always strong at Bathurst, and particularly Courtney and Thomas Randall. That's probably the lineup that I'm most excited to see, to be honest with you, because you've got a wily veteran and then someone who's got all the promise in the world, and you know, since his debut at Bathurst with Percat a couple of years ago, has only, you know, just shown how much more capable he's become in a supercar since that particular time. If anything,
Can I just say before
yeah,
we go, supercars have just posted, I think it was saying 4 hours ago,
yeah,
the Gen 3 Camaro and Mustang, you might already know this will be officially unveiled on Friday. So
Yep.
this Friday, and also some of the images on their Facebook page are pretty awesome. I'm just looking at the Camaro now, and it looks hot. So
yeah, they're
Dude,
going to
they
look a
look-
lot
they
more
look
like
wild.
yeah,
Yep. And you know, another thing that they're going to be doing that we didn't talk about is they're going to have less downforce than they do now, which means
Oh,
there's
yeah.
going to
40%.
be longer
200
braking
kilos
zones,
less. Of,
longer braking zones, and hopefully more overtaking. But yeah, so I think there's a few strong lineups at Bathurst. Just to finish with, we've got
There was one on the tip of my tongue when you started talking, and I can't think of it now.
a lineup.
Oh yeah, like I think that. David Reynolds and Yulden. I think that
Yeah,
one really
I
can't
know.
be
I think
understated either.
Yilden's a bit. I think Yilden's a little bit like. I think their Bathurst championship was probably the end of his use by date. To be honest with you, because the last two Bathurst since then, a lot of mistakes.
I think one thing that is really evident at the moment is that there's too many good drivers in Australia for the actual seats in supercars. So you're getting some of the strongest Bathurst lineups we've seen in a long time, just because there are not enough seats for the drivers that who actually could be racing in supercars at the moment. Like we've seen that even for guys like Randall, who come in these wild cards and perform better than a lot of the mainstays, even like Tanda and Lowndes and all this kind of stuff. Like you see, even when they're doing their GT racing and stuff, they're still at the top of at the top of their potential. So I think we're real spoiled. There's no like once upon a time it was like, oh, get the second driver in the car at the same time or strategize around that. It's such a harder task at the moment.
What's going to be actually interesting to see is there's been a lot of secondary drivers that haven't had much seat time this year. You've seen a high level of concentration of them getting in any car that they can over the last couple of weeks to start getting some seat time. But with the fact that so many of them are going to be racing in other categories this weekend as well, you know, whether it be GTs or TCRs as well as in the supercar, I think what we might have come race time is some secondary drivers that are, you know, just as game fit as some of the drivers that they're going to be teaming up with. So you might have a lineup up to, you know, Holdsworth and Mostert, whereas if, you know, we're going to see the most competitive racing from the co-driver that we might have seen in a long time, I think. And I think
another thing is that, so go.
Keep going, it's okay.
Another thing that we also haven't thought about is that there's only one endurance race this year. Like there's no getting stuff ready at Sandown or the Gold Coast, anything like that. Like this is your one shot, you know what I mean? So like the teams have no sort of practice race, if you want to call like a Sandown a practice race. There's no get ready for it. Like Sandown actually gives the co-drivers a lot of seat time usually because they have their own dedicated race on Saturday. So that's not happening this year. So that's going to be another sort of variable that we haven't seen before. Like they're jumping in with no real race seat time against each other.
This year?
No, we've had
No,
a
we've
500.
had nothing.
We've just
wasn't it the Bathurst 500 at the start of the year?
Yeah, but that's 250 races. Like in terms of the actual enduro race,
no
we've had
backup
nothing.
drivers in that.
So there's no Sandown anymore and no Adelaide.
No.
So
Sandown's coming back as Sandown's a sprint event now.
So are they going to be moving forward any pure 500 races anymore?
What do you mean
Gold
500?
Coast,
as in a one race 500?
So remember when we used to have that Adelaide and Sandown, those two 500s in the season?
Gold Coast is still a
200-300 races.
It's 600, the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
So the Gold Coast is still 600 races. So you've got
300 races.
Sorry, 300. So you've got the co-drivers racing, and I think, I don't know, were they saying Newcastle's going to become a 500?
No, they're gonna have a 500. They're gonna have a 500 enduro race at the Bend.
That's right, at the Bend.
They're gonna have Bathurst, and they're going to have their Gold Coast 600, which is 300-kilometer
so-
races.
so
That's going
one
to be the
pure-
new
one-
Enduro Cup.
So one pure 500.
I wouldn't
and-
mind
and-
going to the Gold Coast race.
Yeah, it's pretty
I love
epic.
Gold Coast. Gold Coast is one
Yeah.
of the
Mm.
best
Well,
street
when
circuits. It's
road trip
amazing.
road trip. The pod can road trip to. I'd like to road trip to Newcastle if you guys were up for it. I think we
Yeah,
wanted
it's
to go a
early.
few
It's first
years
race
ago.
of the year next year.
Yeah.
We've got to get rid of some more of those cards. Newcastle, Bathurst, 12-hour, and F1. We're going to get rid of all those. We're going to start getting some of those business cards out there.
What on
But
tour?
just to finish up, men, it's going to be a great race. There's probably a chance that there's going to be a bit of rain as well, which just creates an even greater spectacle for the Bathurst 1000. And we can
There is
probably do a little.
Throw some gasoline on the fire.
Would,
Yeah,
would
go ahead.
they would they red flag it like they did at Sydney Motorsport Park?
I
Not
found
they
out
stop-
about Sydney Motorsport Park why they red flagged it, which is I can't believe it, to be honest either.
more because
They don't have designated wet tires in supercars. The wet tires they run are intermediates, and because
Oh, okay.
the standing water was so much and it was coming down so quick, they have to red flag it.
So
But I
what's
mean,
that?
in
What
terms
happens
of-
at the top of the mountain where it's all running down and collecting in
that's
one
the
point?
beauty of Bathurst. Water doesn't pool at Bathurst; it runs.
It just
Yeah, I
runs straight
guess.
off the mountain down the
Mm.
hill.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll leave it there, man. So we do have F1 next week.
Yeah,
Yes,
we do.
Jeddah.
So we've got Jeddah next week. That's a conversation in and of itself. So we'll have a review of that race next weekend. We'll do a bit of a review of Bathurst as well and
Yep.
get that out to you after the race. Please give it a watch. And also, please keep sharing the podcast, liking and following on our socials if you aren't doing so already.
We might
Most
even
important-
discuss. I'd like to discuss the legacy of Frank Williams next week in the
Oh,
F1
yeah,
podcast
we didn't even-
as well.
Didn't even talk about it. Yeah.
I mean,
Rest
Sir
in
Frank
peace.
Williams.
rest in peace. And yeah, I think we'll have a bit of a discussion about the legacy he leaves in the sport, because really that's a legacy that can't be underrated.
And strong ties to Australia. Alan Jones,
Mark
Mark
Webber,
Webber,
Mark Webber. So
Sam
Nice,
Michael.
nice
Sam
tribute.
Michael.
Sam Mark, that's right.
Nice tribute post, Harry.
thanks, mate.
All right, man. I think we'll leave it there.
No worries,
great
guys.
week,
Thank
guys,
you very
and-
much.
Enjoy the 1000.
Indeed, I will.